And now, a message from our sponsor, Insights. Insights believes that threat intelligence benefits organizations of all shapes and sizes by helping them proactively defend against an attacker's next move. That's why Insights is offering a free, personalized company threat intelligence report to help you manage the risk in today's cybersecurity landscape. Using only your company's domain, Insights' proprietary tools find potential external threats, including phishing attacks and dark web mentions, targeting your organization within minutes. To download your free threat intelligence report, go to insights.com/cyberwire. And we thank Insights for sponsoring our show. The U.S.-Russian summit took up cyber conflict, cyber privateering, and cyber deterrence, ending with the prospect of further discussions. Ferocious Kitten's domestic surveillance. Ransomware gangs are using a lot of initial access brokers. The Molerats are back. Troubleshooting a wave of intermittent internet interruptions. NSA offers advice on securing business communications tools. Ukrainian police arrest 6 alleged Clop gangsters. Andrea Little Limbago from Interos on bringing the private sector back into the defense equation. Our guest is Charles Herring of WitFoo with the case for cybersecurity as an extension of law enforcement. And 9 alleged ransomware hoods are collared in Seoul. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Thursday, June 17th, 2021. The Russo-American summit between Presidents Putin and Biden concluded yesterday after 3 hours of face-to-face talks. Reuters calls them professional as opposed to friendly, with some expressions of a willingness to pursue matters of arms control and cybersecurity going forward. Recent ransomware attacks came up, the New York Times writes, characterizing the two countries as remaining profoundly divided on this and other matters, with President Biden requesting an explanation and President Putin denying any Russian involvement. In a post-summit media availability, the two presidents did not hold a joint press conference. Mr. Biden said the discussion went like this, quote, "I looked at him and said, how would you feel if ransomware took on the pipelines from your oil fields? He said it would matter. I pointed out to him that we have significant cyber capability, and he knows it." End quote. Forbes reads the U.S. position as a direct promise of retaliation in kind to future Russian cyber attacks. Presumably, the retaliation would be proportionate and symmetrical, but it does seem to represent a move toward some commonly understood deterrence regime, short of the Cold War's mutual assured destruction, and with greater ambiguity, but an attempt at deterrence nonetheless. Computing reports that President Biden not only made reference to U.S. retaliatory capabilities, but also argued that critical infrastructure should be off-limits to cyber attack. For his part, President Putin gave, according to TASS, a fairly ironic take on the summit, quote, "As for the assessment, I believe there was no hostility at all. On the contrary, our meeting was certainly held in a principled manner. We differ in many respects in our assessments. However, to my mind, both sides showed willingness to understand each other and seek ways to bring the positions closer. The conversation was quite constructive." End quote. The New York Times reports that Russian government-aligned media have taken the line that President Biden is a man we can do business with, and that it's gratifying to see that he recognizes Russia as a great power. A report by Kaspersky Labs details a 6-year record of domestic surveillance by an Iranian APT, Ferocious Kitten. As suggestive as the circumstantial evidence may be, Kaspersky doesn't explicitly attribute the operations to Iran's government, but Cyberscoop reports FireEye sees a connection. Security firm Proofpoint discerns a trend among ransomware gangs. They're relying less upon phishing and more on the services of initial access brokers to obtain a foothold in victims' networks. As their report puts it, quote, Ransomware operators often buy access from independent cybercriminal groups who infiltrate major targets and then sell access to the ransomware actors for a slice of the ill-gotten gains. Cybercriminal threat groups already distributing banking malware or other Trojans may also become part of a ransomware affiliate network. The result is a robust and lucrative criminal ecosystem in which different individuals and organizations increasingly specialize to the tune of greater profits for all, except, of course, the victims." End quote. Proofpoint also published a report this morning outlining recent activity by the Molerats, which Proofpoint also calls TA-402, an Arabic-speaking, politically motivated threat group closely associated with elements in Gaza and active principally against Middle Eastern targets. The group is interested in espionage, and its targets are generally governments or what Proofpoint calls government-adjacent organizations. The group's latest campaigns use custom malware LastCon, which appears to be an upgraded version of the previously observed SharpStage malware. LastCon both gains access to the targets and collects information from them. The malware sports distinctive features that render both automated and manual analysis difficult. Those features include geofencing on the basis of IP address, restricting target selection to computers with Arabic language packs installed, and distributing malware in password-protected archive files. The Molerats' typical approach to their targets in this campaign was spear phishing. One interesting observation Proofpoint makes is that whereas the Molerats had been making attacks on a weekly basis, they abruptly went on a 2-month hiatus between March and early May, which coincided with both fighting in Israel and Gaza and with observance of Ramadan. Whatever the reason for the time off, the Molerats seem to be back. Akamai is working to resolve issues with its content delivery platform that have caused brief intermittent outages in airline and financial services sites, CNN reports. The U.S. National Security Agency this morning released advice on securing unified and voice communication. NSA describes the focus of the guidance as minimizing risk of disclosing sensitive info or losing service while using VoIP. Risks include eavesdropping, impersonating users, or perpetrating denial-of-service downtime. Unified communication systems and their closely allied voice-over IP systems offer rich and easy collaboration tools. But they also, and this is a familiar story, offer a more expansive attack surface than do old-school voice telecommunications. NSA advises network segmentation, Layer 2 protections, PSTN, and Internet perimeter protection, staying up to date with patching, authentication, and encryption of signaling and media traffic, deploying standard fraud detection measures, using backups and monitoring to ensure availability, managing the risk of distributed denial of service, controlling physical access, and verifying your systems in a testbed. Ukrainian police have arrested 6 alleged members of the Clop ransomware gang. The Record reports that law enforcement agencies from the Republic of Korea and the United States rendered assistance. The police seized not only servers, but a lot of cash and some fancy luxury cars, which suggests the alleged gangsters were living the gangsta lifestyle, as seen even on Ukrainian TV. And finally, a most unwelcome form of computer customer service has surfaced in South Korea, where police in Seoul arrested 9 employees of a local computer repair company. They're charged with creating and installing ransomware on their customers' computers. The authorities say the suspects got about $321,000 in ransom payments from the 40 or so companies they serviced in 2020 and 2021. Not all the repair company's employees were involved, and the alleged perpetrators were all in the Seoul office. Still, on balance, this can't be good for repeat business. And now, a word from our sponsor, ExtraHop, stopping advanced threats with network detection and response. Stopping advanced threats requires knowing exactly what you're up against. With 90 days look-back, ExtraHop Reveal X is the only solution that shows you not just where the intruders are going within your network, but where they've been. ExtraHop Reveal X provides complete visibility across cloud, data center, and IoT, even when traffic is encrypted. Powered by cloud-based AI, Reveal X finds threats in real time, while powerful investigation and forensics capabilities allow you to respond 84% faster. See how it works in the full production demo, free online at extrahop.com/cyber. That's extrahop.com/cyber. People have varying opinions when it comes to choosing the best metaphor for approaching cybersecurity. Some think it's most similar to public health, emphasizing things like basic hygiene and herd immunity. Others see it as a public safety issue, making sure you have proper locks on your doors and windows, and that you can summon law enforcement if need be. Charles Herring is co-founder and CTO of WitFoo, providers of a SecOps security platform. He joins us to make the case that coming at cybersecurity using a law enforcement model is the way to go.
So, about 20 years ago, after 9/11, I was on active duty in the U.S. Navy and detailed to the Naval Postgraduate School to spin up what we would call today the cybersecurity group there. And the first thing that we spent a lot of time debating was, should the network security group be a security group that focuses on the Navy, on the network? So should the security group be a group that focuses on the network, or should it be a network group that has some security function? And the way that played out is I ended up working for the director of security for the base, and instead of working for the CIO or chief information officer. And the meetings I would have in the department would be with the base police and the intelligence officers, and we would talk about adversaries, criminals, and crimes. And so that was the scope of my initial cybersecurity work. But then I would go to other meetings with the IT department, and we would talk about firewall rules and patching and antivirus and those types of things. And so it was two completely different worlds that I got to experience virtually every day, each with different outcomes and different goals. And that really led to a lot of the research that followed over the next 20 years was, should it be IT or should it be security? And where does each one play a role?
I suspect for a lot of folks, we think that certainly the perception is that a lot of these bad actors are getting away with what they're doing with little consequence.
That's true. So the analogy I like to build is if you built a home and you put a large wall around it and barbed wire fence and put bars on the door and moats around the walls, the reason you do that is to increase the amount of time it would take for a criminal to get inside the home and execute a crime. But if the police are never called, if you're not able to shoot at or protect, create pain for the criminal, those things don't mean anything. They can blow up the wall. They can dig under it. And that's the role that we're supposed to do in security, increasing risk until law enforcement shows up. The major deficiency we have right now is we're not in the habit of collecting evidence in a way that's going to allow us to communicate with law enforcement. And there's also risk associated with calling law enforcement, that we're afraid of what they will discover as part of their investigation, whether it's someone in an organization or something being disclosed. And so what's happening is sort of this code of silence that occurs. We never inform law enforcement. And really, law enforcement is the only group that can go and translate an IP address to a human being and put handcuffs on the person, because the IP addresses don't care about being blacklisted, right? It's like putting handcuffs on the getaway car. It's a component of the crime. And until we're able to take what we consider logs in IT, turn it into evidence, turn that evidence into affidavits, get those affidavits to law enforcement, we can't close the loop on what does it take to move away from just always being terrified and trying to be the last person criminalized, or as a friend of mine said this last week, I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun the slowest person that the bear's chasing.
Right.
That mentality is bad citizenry. And eventually the bear figures out that you're tastier than the slow guy, which is starting to occur now, and that doesn't even work anymore.
That's Charles Herring from WitFoo. It's time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Tanium. Today, we rely on endpoints for everything from remote work to mobile banking, telemedicine, and online learning. That's why managing and securing these endpoints has never been more important. Tanium provides unified endpoint management and security built for the world's most demanding IT environments, providing instant visibility, complete context, and rapid response. That's why all 6 branches of the U.S. Armed Forces and half of the Fortune 100 trust Tanium to protect their IT operations. Join Tanium at this year's Converge 2020 virtual event to learn about the latest advances in unified endpoint management and security, connect with industry peers, and hear directly from other leading technology partners like Google Cloud and Salesforce. Go to converge.tanium.com and enter promo code CyberWire to receive a 15% discount on a lab pass. And we thank Tanium for sponsoring our show. And I am pleased to be joined once again by Andrea Little Limbago. She is the Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos. Andrea, it's always great to have you back. I know lately you have been doing some writing with some of the work you do with NWC about this notion of bringing the private sector into the defense equation. What can you share with us about that work?
Yeah, so the project largely stems on focusing on lessons unlearned in cyber over the last decade or so. And one of the ones that I've seen is just really the lesson unlearned is really how to integrate the role of the private sector in some regards, even just acknowledging just how much the private sector is on the front line of attacks. And so we really, we're still very much so stuck in Cold War mentalities when thinking about what the private sector can and cannot do, what the role of it is, how even the private sector and the government can interact. And so it's really gotten to the point where, one, we haven't evolved our thinking on that at all, despite the enormous attacks that continue to hit the private sector. But it's also leading to the divide. We hear about the Silicon Valley, DC divide that's been going on for quite some time. And even to the point, in very recent testimony, Senator King said that basically smaller companies in Silicon Valley especially have given up on the Pentagon. And so that's not something that is very sustainable for our national security. And fortunately, there have been that's a known problem, and so that's starting to get addressed. But the challenge is that it's not changing enough. And so, in some regards, the Pentagon-Silicon Valley gap, that is how it's generally framed, is starting to be addressed by things such as the Defense Innovation Unit and Defense Works, those kind of new governmental programs that are aimed at expediting the acquisition process. And then conversely, there are plenty of efforts out there, not plenty, but there's some efforts out there that are trying to get technologists into policy, like the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, Tech Congress, NSI as a Technologist Fellowship. And so all those programs are really great, and they're very useful at addressing specifically the Silicon Valley DC divide. But the private sector is much bigger than that. And so we really need to think about what will the role of the private sector be, potentially in warfare. I mean, so that it's one of those things that sometimes it takes a shock to really think these kinds of these new thinking about how to address it. But like in the pandemic, we saw many in the private sector switch their manufacturing model to help support manufacturing of health equipment. And so the question is, what would happen if there was some sort of conflict? What would be the role of the cybersecurity community? What would be the role of others in the financial sector, in the energy sector? Really the broader manufacturing sector. And so we really don't have good answers for that because we still think about it much more so in a Cold War mentality. And so we're at a point though where the private sector is really rethinking their role as far as the role with national security, and even as far as their own footprint. And so we're at actually a very opportune window right now where, because the private sector has had so much disruption from COVID, from the reshoring and the various supply chains disruptions, they're rethinking their global footprint right now and their role in building technology and what's in their technology stack. And so it's a really good time for the government to rethink, how could the private sector and public sector work together? You have more in the private sector now that are much more willing to address some of the national security concerns. It's not all of them, but there are some much more so now than in the past. And so what can we do to bring the private sector back into the defense equation and do things that are as it makes sense, collaboration in the areas of where the bottom line and national security overlap. And I'd argue that overlap is bigger than it has been in quite some time.
When you say that we're still approaching this from a Cold War mentality, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's basically, and it's on both sides, by the way. It's both on, several times we hear it's coming from the government side and also very much so on the private sector, where for a while it was, you're really thinking the government is the ones is in charge of entirely national security. The private sector is in charge of business. And for a lot, the two don't cross. Early in the Cold War, especially much even more so during World War II, the private sector played a much more outsized role in national security. And that really has just kind of ebbed since that time. And so we need to get back to thinking about how the private sector can be an asset towards national security. And it can be in a variety of ways. And it doesn't necessarily have to be actually even being involved in warfare. But when you think about the restructuring going on as far as the various technologies and what technologies and companies are allowed and not allowed within businesses these days, that there's been over 300 Chinese companies that have been named by Commerce that are no longer allowed to be, have partnerships with companies in the U.S. And so the U.S. is now, the U.S. corporations are being hit both by the various disruptions from the trade war and the tech war, as well as all these regulation shifts. And so they're really rethinking where the footprint of where they're going to be and what technologies are going to be in their tech stack going forward. And so that's a good time for the government to both help out as far as providing various kinds of incentives. Like Japan, for instance, has paid over $4 billion to its private, or is in process of paying that to their private sector to help them reshore. And so there's a lot on what the U.S. could do on the incentive side to help with the compliance, to build towards those kind of trusted networks that the U.S. government wants to build for greater national security. And so there's just a lot that could be done in that area from that to even a more of a holistic and actually moving toward a federal data protection law would be very, very helpful. Just to have some greater consistency across, it makes compliance a whole lot easier. And really thinking about those different areas and just what could be the broad range of incentives that the government could help with to help move towards those trusted tech stacks, to move, when they're thinking about reshoring, helping out and facilitating where they may want to go and providing, additional kinds of, carrots for like-minded countries that might be good places, both for the business, for the bottom line, but also might make sense on the national security side. And so there's a lot of transformations that are going on. And if the government and private sector can work a little bit better on that, I think we'll be just a lot more prepared going forward into the future to handle all the transformations that are going on.
All right. Well, Andrea Little Limbago, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Puru Prakash, Kelsey Bond, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And now a message from our sponsor, Cyberreason. If you're a defender fighting to protect your organization from the dark forces of cyber attackers, it might seem attackers have the advantage. To win, they only need to be successful once. As a cyber defender, you must be successful in ending attacks every single time. Cyberreason reverses the attacker's advantage. They put the power back in your hands. Their future-ready attack platform gives defenders the wisdom to uncover, understand, and piece together multiple threats, and the precision focus to end cyber attacks instantly on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Wherever your organization's data is being threatened, Cyberreason is ready to win the battle against cyber attacks, with you and for you. Join them and the world's leading companies. Together, we are the defenders. Cyberreason. End cyber attacks. from endpoints to everywhere. Learn more at cyberreason.com/cyberwire. And we thank Cyberreason for sponsoring our show.